Alright, so we're back, of course, talking about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, kind of Rebirth. Also, we're also talking about the boy Zack. Of course, we're talking about Zack. What else do I ever talk about? And I want to talk about the future, story when it comes to Rebirth and beyond, and whether or not Zack would have any sort of, I guess the right way to say it is like reaction to the Genova cells in his body. And this was actually a question I posed on Twitter, which is something I often do. If you happen to follow me on Twitter, but also watch my YouTube videos, you'll see that I often tweet out stuff I'm going to make videos about. Because I want to kind of get everybody's reaction on this as well, what they kind of think is going to happen going forward. And the reason I do stuff like this is because I got a mixed response, right? There was more people that seem to think that Zack wouldn't have any sort of effect with the Genova cells because he seems to be, I guess, immune to them, at least based on OG FF7. There's a couple different reports you can read in the Shinra Manor basement, and when you're reading them, subject A is Zack, subject B is Cloud. This one says, former member of Soldier, no effect could be detected from either Mako radiation therapy or Genova on him. Then you also have people point out that you have to be kind of like weak-willed, weak-minded, whatever the case, for Genova to affect you, which is why she's able to affect Cloud, but not Zack, because obviously Cloud's mind is broken through the FF7 story. Those things are absolutely true, but even with that said, there's still people out there that do believe that there could be some sort of, Genova/Sephiroth manipulation or some sort of effect that Zack has when it comes to the Genova cells in his body. And I kind of fall on both sides of this discussion because with the former part of this, with him having no effect to Genova cells, I mean, that's what the lore tells us, right? At least with Shinra's testing on Zack, they don't see any sort of effect from Genova cells. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't be sometime in the future, but at least in their testing, there wasn't anything. And that's kind of where I can fall into the latter camp because there are aspects of Zack and Genova that we've not yet seen, right? Because the main thing here is reunion. When it comes to the FF7 story, a big part of the story is reunion theory, right? And during all of that, Zack is dead. But at least with the ending we got for Remake, it seems to imply Zack could be alive. And even if through Shinra's testing there was no effect to Zack and Genova, who's to say how the Genova cells in his body would react once reunion starts? I think it's a big part of the upcoming story with Rebirth and beyond that some people are kind of ignoring. Because prior shit shows you that Zack's immune, but we have no idea how his body's going to react to Genova trying to bring all of her Genova cells together, right? That's got to at the very least, even if Zack can't be manipulated or controlled by Sephiroth/Genova, you'd think that at least the cells in his body would compel him to go towards Genova, right? Kind of like what is happening with Cloud and stuff in FF7 original is he's compelled to go certain places, compelled to chase Sephiroth, etc., etc. And that's the thing here, when we're talking about Zack being affected by the Genova cells in his body, it can be big or small. It can be as big as potentially being manipulated or controlled by Sephiroth/Genova, or it could just be this urge that he has to kind of go towards certain locations or certain directions, right? Because he's being compelled by reunion. And the thing is, it's a pretty common idea out there, at least if you're of the belief that Zack and our group from Remake are in the same timeline, that eventually Zack will meet up with our party at some point. Now, the common ideas that I've heard out there are either the North Crater, which is where everybody thinks that, Rebirth is going to end, or potentially at the Forgotten Capital, City of the Ancients, and be there present for Aerith's death. And the thing is, I think that the latter of the two makes a lot of sense, just because if they're going to do Aerith's death again, which is a possibility, they could do something different, but they could just do it the same. It's going to hit harder just in general because we have voice acting, but you got to kind of step it up, right? And how do you step up Aerith's death? Having Zack be present during that. And that's a common idea I've heard out there. I think Max and some others have talked about that before. But regardless of which one of those would actually happen, whether Zack would go to the Forgotten Capital or the North Crater, why would he go there? What would be the reason for him going there, right, in his story? I think Genova cells makes a lot of sense. That he'd have this urge or this desire to go in this direction, to go here. Because if he's in Midgar looking for Aerith, I don't know why he would ever leave Midgar in pursuit of anything else, unless he knows that she's outside of Midgar, which I don't know how you'd know that. Especially considering that he knows, based on Crisis Core, that Aerith has never left Midgar, so there wouldn't be any reason for him to think that she would be gone, but maybe if he exhaustively searches Midgar and all the different slums and shit, and he can't find Aerith, maybe he'd go on some sort of journey to try to find out where she might have went. There's also the idea of a dead Aerith in this alternate timeline. Some people think that with the crime people in the church or whatever the case. Not the biggest fan of that idea, but that is a possibility. And if that is the case, maybe his goal is to track down whoever killed Aerith and maybe get some revenge or whatever the case. And maybe that's what compels him to leave the walls of Midgar. But I think ultimately the Genova cells could come into play, because I don't know why else he'd be going to the North Crater specifically and or the Forgotten Capital unless he was compelled to go there by the cells in his body. And it's not even that I'm against this dead Aerith story arc thing for Zack when it comes to Rebirth or whatever, because there should be something, right? Because we talked about this before a lot on the channel, about there should be copies of certain characters, namely the characters that were inside the Singularity, that were unaffected by the change or whatever the case. We see Zack carrying an unconscious Cloud to Midgar. That Cloud has to exist somewhere, right? So there should be another Aerith somewhere, potentially dead, but then you got to factor in what are they doing with the other copies, right? Because there should be another copy of Barrett, Tifa, and Red 13. Then it gets too convoluted. So I don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to do anything at all with these potential alternate versions of our characters. I don't know. It's a whole nother rabbit hole. Anyways, back on topic. So, with the discussion of Zack being immune to Jenova, there's really nothing saying that he would always, forever, say he lived a full regular life, that he'd always be immune to Jenova. There's nothing saying that he wouldn't be affected by it in the future, right? It's only in Shinra's testing that he was immune. Thing is, too, we've never seen Zack, like, fully broken, right? He's definitely distraught whenever Angel dies, when he's in the church with Aerith crying and stuff like that. But we never seen him, like, fully broken to the level of, like, what Cloud is at the end of Crisis Core, beginning of FF7, right? And one thing that could do that is Aerith's death. Going back to what we said earlier in the video about Zack potentially being present whenever Aerith dies within the Rebirth story, that would probably break Zack to the point where he could be manipulated by Sephiroth/Jenova. And again, that's the thing. We've never seen Zack really truly at his lowest, because even after the shit he goes through with Angel and throughout the Crisis Core story, he's still that upbeat guy, still the hero. Even at the end, when he's facing down the Shinra army and death is all but a certainty, he's still just a beat regular Zack, right? But if he were to catch up with our group eventually, maybe even in the timeline where he thinks Aerith is dead, he's pursuing Aerith's killers, meets up with our group, finds out that this Aerith is at least alive, and then has to bear witness to her death, that could definitely break the character of Zack, I feel like. Enough to the point that he can maybe be manipulated by Jenova/Sephiroth. What they do with that manipulation, I don't entirely know. We're just talking, we're just riffing here. And another reason why I think that Zack could eventually be affected by Jenova cells in some capacity is that even Sephiroth was, right? It's not necessarily that Jenova was controlling Sephiroth or anything. They have like more of a symbiotic relationship. And even when it comes to FF7 Original, he's more so manipulating Jenova to his will, but it still kind of worked together, and he was never really the same after the Nibelheim incident. So I just feel like if Sephiroth evolved, people can have some sort of effect with the Jenova cells in his body, then I feel like everybody could, right? Unless they want to make Zack just that guy. Maybe Zack is like the one person out there that is just completely in every possible way immune to the Jenova cells, except for maybe getting stronger because of them. I think it'd be kind of cool. It'd be a nice little story arc that like he just cannot be affected anyway, no matter how much his will is broken or something. That'd be kind of interesting. And actually, hopping back to something we talked about previously, Zack might not actually have to be present for Aerith's death to actually have his will broken, right? Because if he's in this altered timeline where there is a dead Aerith, that might be all it takes, right? If he thinks that Aerith is dead, that might be enough to just break his will where he can't be manipulated. I guess ultimately my point here is that Zack was never present whenever reunion theories happen, whenever it's actually taking effect, right? And I just feel like there's got to be something that comes from that. You got to think that the Jenova cells are the most active, the most powerful, if you want to call it that, the most compelled to want to join up with the body of Jenova, or whatever the case. So there's got to be some sort of effect on Zack to some capacity, again, unless they want to make him just that guy that's entirely, completely immune in every way, which I guess is kind of cool too. But of course, that's why it's a discussion video, right? It's not like a super in-depth researched video where we're breaking down all kinds of lore or whatever the case. It's just more of us talking about possibilities for when it comes to Rebirth and beyond. So I want to pass it off to you guys. What are your thoughts on this? Because again, like I said, a simple tweet I put out, I got mixed responses because some people think there's going to be something that comes from it, whether it's manipulation, reunion stuff, or whatever the case. And there's other people that think that Zack is just completely immune and that nothing would come of it, which I can see it from both perspectives, right? So I don't really know which camp I really fall on. I do think there's something interesting with the idea of Zack and reunion. I think it'd be kind of cool that he's at least, at the very least, like I said earlier in the video, compelled to want to go in the direction of like Sephiroth and Jenova, right? Compelled to want to go towards North Crater and shit like that, where it could be the excuse for why he's kind of following our group, going towards our group, and he just doesn't realize that that's the reason why. But of course, my dudes, that's the video, so hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new today. More Final Fantasy VII Rebirth content. Turn on notifications, follow me for -YT. I'm going to Discord links for some networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame, we blow that like Coltrane. We